Welcome to part 2 of Integrity Matters by Turnitin. We're continuing the conversation with Dr. Chieh Adachi of Deakin University. Now, I think you touched a little bit on this, but I want to expand on this further. Now, with new technology for every institution, we know that there are academics who are technology savvy, and there are some who are, I've done it a certain way for 15 years, I don't need to change it, or I don't need to adopt the technology. How would you say, from your experience as director, you have been able to manage the resistance to change from academics, educators who are opposed to technology?
Interesting you say we've managed the resistance. And I don't know if I see it that way, but I would say embrace and work with the resistance. As I say, the healthy skepticism actually advances our understanding and practice. So it's not always an inhibitor, it's actually an opportunity. But I'll also say this, that the COVID-19 pandemic actually forced people to move online quickly. So we didn't really have that much time to ask why people needed to move online. And before COVID, that was my job, to convince people why people needed to move online. But because they didn't have time to ask this, but it was a survival mechanism to stay connected with students and continue teaching online, the focus kind of became, how can we do this best we can? How can we help students and staff the best way we know? And of course, at Deakin, we had really good foundation to build on that, because even before COVID, 25% of our entire cohort of 60,000 students were only studying in online. So we leveraged off a lot from that too. But in terms of looking at what has happened and the kind of learnings that has emerged through this experience, and this is a bit of a plug for Deakin's work again, but to capture and share those stories of people successfully moving to online and doing the good work, we started doing a new podcast called Tales of Teaching Online, and you can find this on SoundCloud, and I highly recommend it. That my team has been talking to a variety of people at Deakin in showcasing their practice. One of the really interesting stories that I had the privilege to interview was with this dance teacher, Olivia Millard, senior lecturer in that disciplinary area. And given they had such focus on embodied practice of dancing, and their studio work with the students on campus were integral part to their learning and teaching, moving to online was a big paradigm shift for them. And I think initially they would have had some resistance to move into online. But again, like I said, they didn't have time to think about that, but they had to move online. But beautifully, of course, that teaching team of dance team took this chance to be their silver lining moment. And in connecting with students and dancing through Zoom, they found new ways and affordances of teaching online. And some of the things that they say, they would never go back to where they were before. Things like the feedback process that's changed through the use of technology. They used to have this big dance exposition or presentation at the end of that unit, and that used to happen always on campus with limited limited amount of people giving feedback live. Now they started doing this online with Zoom. They could have more people, the experts who might not be otherwise able to come to the campus, and then they were able to provide immediate feedback in the chats with audio and with links to resources that students can look beyond after the presentation was done. So, and then they're all recorded because it's on online environment. So they found those kind of new opportunities that they didn't think about before. So again, coming back to the idea of resistance, we should embrace it and talk about it as an opportunity to learn something new, and then work with that sort of tension, if you like.
Excellent. I think the idea of embracing resistance is one of the things we should do more of, because my opinion, and this is my opinion, is oftentimes when we don't go with the resistance, we miss the opportunity to innovate or do things in the learning and teaching space. So we're going to move into the assessment space. You've already mentioned earlier of the need for maybe less high-stake assessments, maybe more authentic assessments. Now, how has assessment been impacted COVID and currently still living with COVID? We're not doing post-COVID, as you said. And is technology informing or enabling successful delivery of assessments?
Yeah, really important one on assessment, because we know that assessment drives learning. If you especially take that school of thought of David Bowd and so forth, assessment for learning. And as I said, one of the key areas of learning and teaching activities had to go through the significant thinking around exam, and also in the online space, of course. So this was one of the key challenges that many universities have faced, that idea of our reliance on timed, supervised, in-person exams. So there's a whole range of things that do happen around exam. It's not just pedagogy, it's not just technology, but all the processes and policies and practices around it. And one of the biggest concerns I think people have had in moving to online and online exam was that students are going to cheat because they are now in online. But at Deakin, we've made conscious effort to just not revert to technology solution by simply translating exams to invigilated or proctored exam, but to redesign those exams to be more authentic and inclusive assessment practices online. So the principle was to ensure the achievement of learning outcomes that can be demonstrated by students online. And so a lot of them become open book exams and submitted through our LMS, and some others used a quiz tool by rewriting those exam questions, MCQs, to be more authentic rather than testing memorization of information or rote learning, as you probably heard from a lot of the universities. But thankfully at Deakin, we also had that parallel strategic project to actually look at the proctoring solutions as well. And so this was a pilot that was going alongside with what we're trying to do with the best practice principles for writing online exams or designing online exams. And this project continues this year, and it's a small pilot, but it's been useful to trial some of the online proctoring solutions where especially accrediting bodies had requirements to have supervised, timed exams. So it's been useful. But if you look at across the sector, and ACODE published this white paper last year, it's actually only 50% or so of higher education institutions in Australia that do have instance of proctoring solutions. So I think there are lots of still issues and concerns to be addressed before we can see that to be a viable option. And we know that that's not essentially the best practice of doing the online exam to be supervised and proctored anyway. So I think we need to think a little bit more broadly about assessment practices, and exam has been a learning opportunity for all of us because it has had such a focus, and our reliance on exam has been really evident.
Beautifully put. One thing you've been, I'll say, actively involved in is the CRADLE project at Deakin. So this is where I'd like you to describe what CRADLE is for the viewers or people who are listening to this, and how has the research results from CRADLE impacted learning and teaching, and for assessment in particular, how has this changed
I'm glad that you asked that question, Chuck, because if you're working in higher education, anyone should know about CRADLE. So CRADLE is our research center that sits within the DBCE portfolio, and it stands for Center for Research in Assessment and Digital Learning. And we're so lucky to have them and be able to work with them. So they're not only a group of highly regarded and highly performing, very productive researchers in the area of higher education research on assessment and digital learning, but also a group of experts that we internally at Deakin can count on for guidance and enhancing our practice for learning and teaching at Deakin. So they sometimes evaluate our projects, our learning and teaching projects, and write reports for some of those projects. And I must say, anyone who knows CRADLE would agree that every single researcher in that center is such a lovely, very approachable people that makes such a difference in terms of research collaboration that might actually have impact on practice. And these research projects and the outputs of those research are internationally and institutionally really useful and impactful. So for example, last year in March, they've worked with the central unit and created this very useful guide called Ensuring Academic Integrity and Assessment Security with redesigned online delivery. So this was when people were moving their assessment to online, and this guide on our DTeach, which is the learning and teaching site, remains one of the most hit resources of our resources online. And so lots of people from outside were looking at CRADLE's work and benefiting from their research to then think about improving their practice. So I think CRADLE provides a lot of opportunities in terms of that intersection between research and practice for assessment and digital learning and teaching in general for higher education.
I think CRADLE has been a huge force for the educational community, and I think what I enjoy, or my experience with CRADLE, is the passion that comes from the academics who actually are part of the project. We've talked to the likes of Phil. I've met Roland Jawi, or I've been in a couple of sessions with David Bald. So I can see the passion, and I think that's the passion that is drawing the crowd, people wanting to learn and digest it and actually apply that to their teaching.
And their work is good.
Yes,
their research is really high quality.
Yeah. And the time that they're taking to do it, that's what actually proves the quality of their research as well. Now we know that technology is coming to stay in terms of higher education, for edtech companies, or like you mentioned, can't remember what word you used to describe the emerging technologies. How would you measure success of rollout for technology when we're looking at enhancement of digital learning, especially among students and educators? What's your criteria for measuring success?
No, interesting question. And I think evaluation phase in any types of change projects, like introducing a new technology, is essential. And whether it be done formally or informally, we should be thinking about doing that. And success measures should be always centered around if this new change has improved student learning experiences or outcomes in digital learning. And so developing digital literacy skill sets or the capability should be part of that evaluation. But I do think that there are two different things in looking at the development of digital literacy and evaluating that project itself. So in our digital learning innovation projects, we make our best effort to ensure designing our program around supporting teachers and their students, so that the new tech, edutech, can be used effectively and wisely. So we run many workshops and create self-paced learning guides on digital pedagogy and use of technology. But one of the aspects that I briefly mentioned before, and not many teachers think about this, but it's that idea of user experience, and that's actually really important, and not many people talk about this in higher education, I don't think. So this should be part of our ongoing evaluation of edutech because of those digital literacy skills and the issues around that. The fact that there's less cognitive overload in trying to learn new technology due to good UX is important. If technology is designed well and users don't need to think hard about learning that technology, but use it to the purpose that was designed for. So not surprisingly, the concept UX is still something that's out there for tech industry or business areas to think about, but not so much from the within the educational discourse. So in order to advance our endeavors on digital education, this is something that we do need to raise more awareness and involve edutech industries and teachers alike to improve user experience in our digital learning environments.
Beautifully put, and those suggestions will be taken on board. I think it's one of the things we need to do better as an edtech company, Turnitin. So when we started this conversation, our initial goal was to get your sense of some lessons learned, COVID, post-COVID. So to wrap up today's session, I just want to end it with this question. What are some lessons learned from the sudden pivot to remote and hybrid learning from your experience? And maybe if you've heard any other things in the grapevine, please share with us as well.
Thank you. I think that's a question to wrap up, and some of the things that I've already talked about, but I'd like to share a few ideas here. I think firstly and most importantly, we learned that teachers and students are very agile and responsive and very much willing to help each other, especially through COVID, challenging time when people are dealing with, life stuff, dealing with the pandemic and ensuring that them and then their loved ones are safe and healthy, and a lot of struggles have been found. So even through that time, we learned, especially at Deakin, that teachers and students rose to the occasion and continued to connect and learn and teach for each other. And it's been a privilege to work at a place like Deakin, who has got that sort of really good culture. But we also had a lot of foundations before COVID to leverage off and scale up to cater for our 60,000 students. So I think that's one thing that's come out strongly and positively, that the people are capable of moving to online quickly and can do good practice. But now, as I said, the idea of engagement and interaction is really important. And this is something that our students told us that they missed, especially first-year students, for example. So we do now need to think about how can we design our online learning experiences to be engaging and more interactive. And now is the time to do that. So the idea of, or the pedagogy of care, I think, is important in light of looking after those teachers and students who might be feeling fatigue, who might be still finding their feet moving to online. We need to be carefully thinking about how to build online learning community, cultivate that sense of belonging, stay connected, stay engaged and interactive. I think that element of pedagogy of care for online, and Jesse Stommel from the US is one of the great examples of talking about these kind of pedagogy. So I would say that that's one of the important things. And the maybe last comment that I would share here is that it's not an easy time to be an academic or teacher in higher education at the moment. As you probably know, the finance and the impact that international students and the lack of those students have had on the higher education sector is really significant. And so we are seeing some of our colleagues leaving, a lot of the changes happening structurally at the university. So we do need to be mindful of how much change or how much work we are actually asking teachers to do. But focus on leveraging off what we have as good practice and what we know works, and leveraging off and focusing on those while we're supporting those teachers and students going through this phase of living with COVID, as we said, Chuck.
Yes, I agree. So to that response to that question, I'd like to say a big thank you to Dr. Chie for your time today. Today we were looking at teaching and learning in a digital world, lessons learned. We're not saying post-COVID, we're saying living through the pandemic COVID. Thank you again, and I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much, Chuck, for having me.
インテグリティスマターをご視聴いただきありがとうございました。足立先生、本日は、誠にありがとうございました。皆様にとって有益な情報であったことと願います。ご意見やご感想など、ございましたら、ぜひインテグリティスマターまでお寄せください。皆様からのフィードバックをお待ちしております。